Hey guys, it's Drake, and this is going to be one of my classic, absolutely no structure, probably too long videos, all right? So, as usual, I recommend not watching, and against my better judgment, I'll make it. 'Cause part of the problem I always have is that whenever I go into making one of these videos, I always try to have some sort of structure, like, okay, I'll make it about, good contemporary poets, or I'll make it about German Minnesang, verse, or Indo-European poetics and myth, or something that I've been interested in lately. Or like one video I've been meaning to do is the rare Gaddis books I have, and I enjoy making those more focused videos, but I think I don't know, I think I just live in a more scattered way, or I don't know, maybe more connected way, I don't know. But anyway, so I just have kind of a random smattering together of books that I've been thinking about or reading lately, or, interested in. So I'm not really sure how this is going to go, but we'll start with the man himself, William Gaddis. And this book choice is more of a symbolic choice. I'm not really going to talk a whole lot about this book itself, but more about what it means to me in my mind, like when I think about this. So for those of you who might not know the background of this book specifically, or how Gaddis wrote it, or what it came from. So, Gaddis, who was born in 1922 and came of age around the end of World War II and through the 50s, contemporary with the more famous beat authors. He saw the rise of automation, especially automated art, and he was fascinated, whether that's positive or negative, by player pianos, automatic art, automatic music. And he started to write, as far as I understand it, by the early 50s, at the latest that I know. By the early 50s, he started to write this kind of social study of player pianos. And as you guys might know, for those of you who have read JR, he was fascinated by cybernetics and systems complexity, and communication theory, and all sorts of things. Economics, complex systems, and stuff you might, look at if you look into the Santa Fe Institute, that sort of thing. Interestingly enough, I don't think he ever went there. Maybe he was too old by that point, but McCarthy, of course, is, as far as I know, the only writer in residence at the Santa Fe Institute. So interesting. But anyway, back to Gaddis. So, of course, Kurt Vonnegut wrote a book, 1952, 52, I think it's 52, called Player Piano, which I haven't read, but I've been interested in, mainly just as a commentary on Gaddis, like what was in the air when Gaddis started thinking about this stuff. Other relatively intelligent people, what they were thinking about. But of course, in the early 50s, we have the first significant leaps in computer technology. We have the first gleams of what you could call AI and neural networks, with Walter Pitts and the other guy's slipping my mind now, but Walter Pitts is fascinating. I hope a biography is written about him. I might try to put one together myself if I can. Walter Pitts, Norbert Wiener, which of course brings us back to Gaddis. Incidentally, Norbert Wiener wrote a novel called The Tempter, which is kind of interesting. But Also in the 50s, we have the development of DNA, or the development of the idea of DNA, of course. The further development of nuclear bombs and their proliferation. We have the growth of the United States as the complete hegemon of the earth. Having large majorities of the production of steel, large majorities of production of household goods, cars, etc. And that was, in a way, a cultural flourishing, but also a really stifled time in many ways. But even further than that, leading us to the present day, now we have things like GPT-3, text generation algorithm that can have conversations, like, reasonable conversations with you. If you guys remember that story I had of doing a Turing test with GPT-3, and humans barely squeaked out the Turing test, where we could decide which one was the human and which one was the AI only about, I think it was 60% of the time. Just barely utilizing the wisdom of the crowd, which also might have thrown some things off. But often the way you could tell it was a human is because it was stupider, made less sense, which I think is interesting. But so we get humans being beaten at every closed game. Not quite every closed game, a finite game, but it eventually will be there pretty soon, I think. And interestingly enough, the stock market is a finite game. So soon enough, AI will be able to just totally control the stock market and commodity markets and things. So might have to close those down at some point, because that'll be used as another form of warfare. And when you look at the complexity and systems dynamics of social media, and how they can work as like a rudder for humanity, like an unintentional rudder or automatic rudder, in a way that turns the whole ship, even though we're not realizing that the turning is happening. And it makes me think, I've been reading this book called The Sunflower Forest, which is about restoration of ecosystems, rather than working just as preservation, but actually working as intentional and integrating restoration, like integrating in the sense of like actively participating in the restoration rather than just trying to defend a preserve. And I think about that with social media, because I tend to try to stay off it. I haven't used Facebook and I don't know how long, and other things. I used Twitter for a little while, but I've been off of it for a few weeks now. And YouTube, I think, is kind of like a quasi social media, because it tends to be, at least to me, less radicalizing. But I'm sure some people, get on weird strands, falling down the rabbit holes and so on. But it makes me think, like, is the only way to make it better is to insert yourself in it and try to improve the system as a whole. But I'm not even sure if that's possible, frankly, as it would be with plant ecosystems and wildlife ecosystems. But and it's also interesting that, since I'm teaching now, and I work with students who were born in, 2007, 2008, roughly. I work with freshmen and sophomores here in the high school. Just seeing how they interact with, their computers and their phones, and some of the kids are like thoroughly addicted. Like, they can't go 20 minutes without putting their headphone back in their ear and listening to some, inevitably terrible music, or playing some mindless snake game or whatever it is. And then, of course, on the other hand, there are some kids that can still handle life like you used to 150 years ago, without any of this. And I think the gap between the people who can live like that, focusing on things for hours at a time, and the gap between people that can't is going to be massive, just absolutely massive. And unless things change considerably over the next maybe couple decades, the people who can pay attention for any amount of time are going to get everything, or at least they're going to be able to choose whether or not they want everything. And then the people who are, captured by the attention thieves, or however you want to phrase it, are just done. Like, they're at the mercy of whoever wants to control them, unfortunately. And I think the only chance we have is smart people to change the systems and the incentives, which might not happen, because it seems to me what I've noticed is that smart people tend to just eject themselves. This idea of the Bitcoin millionaire moving to a Latin American country and hiring like a, paramilitary army or something to defend their square mile property or whatever. Because of course, I'd say the majority of people who end up getting wealthy in their lifetime are relatively intelligent compared to their society, because they're quicker, they can figure out something other people can't figure out, whatever. But then they use that intelligence to become hyper selfish and just vampirically suck on society and then bounce, as soon as things get a little dicey. And I think that's pretty repulsive as like a mentality. And in a way, I joke about it myself, as far as this idea of like just getting enough money and, hermiting up in some rural area, maybe in the, Upper Peninsula or something, or, just a rural Midwestern state. But on the other hand, and of course there are ways you can integrate yourself from those places, but with the internet, but also I think about, maybe trying to help redesign the political system in the US, because I think it's past due by far. I think we pretty much need another constitutional convention or something at this point to avert a serious catastrophe. But yeah, I don't know. And I've recently run across the Civium project with Jordan Hall and Daniel Schmachtenberger and these type of Game B type of guys, and I think it's a valuable way of thinking, just this idea that a societal alternative is possible, and it doesn't have to be like 1850s communism, 1920s Bolshevism, 1920s to 30s far-right fascism. It doesn't have to be anarcho-communism necessarily in the way that it was perceived, maybe 100 years ago, or maybe even, I don't know, Chomsky has fairly sophisticated views, but even he, I don't think, could have imagined how much technology can allow this sort of transformation to happen. Technology in the sense of like, a system that's able to incorporate way more parameters than a human brain can possibly juggle, and kind of simplify it into a simulation so that a human can understand it. Because I think that's the main downfall of most of these political movements in the 20th century, is that there were simply too many people. And I think it is that simple, that there were too many people, which led to too much uncertainty, which led to like hyper maladaptive behaviors to try to increase the certainty or limit the complexity. Fear and trauma, or just extreme control. And then in the US, that kind of manifested as a subtle control. This idea that Gaddis has, to tie it back. He never experienced any censorship because no one was reading his books anyway. So why would you censor something that nobody's reading? It's funny. But all right, so that's Agape Agape by William Gaddis. And also here, I think I'm just going to read a poem of Ezra Pound. I go back and forth on Ezra Pound. I can see why people enjoy him, but also I think compared to his contemporaries, he leaves a lot to be desired. But I think some of his cantos are very beautiful, like especially the first few. I think he was really hitting some high points in modernist poetry there. And then also, I've always felt a pretty close kinship with his early historical poems. And I picked out a particular example that I like of these. So this one is from his Reposts collection, which was, if I remember correctly, dedicated to William Carlos Williams and was published in 1912. Also T.E. Home. And this is the first poem in the book. I don't know how do you say this, maybe Sile. But anyway, here's the poem. When I behold how black, immortal ink drips from my deathless pen, ah, well away, why should we stop at all for what I think? There is enough in what I chance to say. It is enough that we once came together. What is the use of setting it to rhyme? When it is autumn, do we get spring weather, or gather May of harsh north windish time? It is enough that we once came together. What if the wind have turned against the rain? It is enough that we once came together. Time has seen this and will not turn again. And who are we who know that last intent to plague tomorrow with a testament? All right, so that's Ezra Pound from his collected early poems. And then another good poet from the 20th century. I don't know how to say, he's a Czech poet, and I don't know the sound of Czech, so I'm just going to call him Yvonn Blaney, which might be wrong. And this is published by Ugly Duckling Press, one I've recently featured, and this is The Drug of Art, a bilingual edition of this Czech poet. A little bit of background of him, you can read some of it there, but he was born a few years before Gaddis, I think 1919. So he was a 20-year-old whenever all the horrible stuff happened for World War II. And he was exiled from Czechoslovakia in 1948 because of the communist coup. And through a long way around, he ended up in England. And because of the trauma he had from, being ousted and having to live in exile, and Czechoslovakian radio pronounced him dead, like literally dead, when he left. He was in and out of mental hospitals and really suffered some extreme paranoia while he was living in England. And after his 20s, he wrote in multilingual poetry. So he has some French and Czech poems. He has some poems that have French, Czech, and English. He has some poems chiefly in English, but also some Czech thrown in. And I wanted to read a couple poems of his. So the first one is from his first collection of poems called Brno Elegies. And I read this one actually in our poetry potluck. It's in my Discord, or the Discord for this channel, where every Sunday we've been meeting and everyone brings a poem or two or three or four, and we kind of go around in circles and read our poems and talk about them and so on. So if you're interested in joining with that, feel free to hop in the Discord that we have. You can go to the About page on my YouTube channel and find it. All right, and this is one of his poems. That's from 1941, I think it was published. If you came with me, you'd see what I like. A church, a bridge, a ditch, this countryside so ordinary and beautiful beside, a river, the chestnut's fragrant shade, its look. So water from the well clears off the dust that settled on a face ruddy and tanned, and falls on books, on a letter from a friend, and covers paintings, quietly drapes a bust. It was July, and I was coming back, you at the window nodding from afar. The swifts just risen like an airborne bazaar, glittering roosters, the castle's glassy stack. And near the earth, the sky was set ablaze by wooded hills, then darkened from the top. I heard a cry above the goldsmith's shop. For breakfast I had strawberries. Such days. Kind of reminds me of T.S. Eliot's poetry. And then I have another one, which I believe comes later. I believe it's just found in manuscript, but it's autumn. Raking leaves in the park, what could be better? To go here and there, slow to return, as time returns, as distance returns too. Nostalgic, like stamps on a letter. I found a letter written only in lead, rain-worn, half-torn. Oh, epistolary era, where have you fled? I have written long letters as Rilke used to. No more, farewell, it's November, late. The red horses are out of the gate. So that's Yvonn Blaney. Ugly Duckling Press. And then I have a couple books I've been looking at for my Indo-European linguistics and myth, poetics. So I have these just out because I just think it's totally fascinating. This is kind of tied into my interest with Finnegan's Wake, but also the Golden Bow and T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, and these sort of modernist works that tried to account for the world, you know. But at the high school I teach at, they have this kind of study hall system where, you know, it rotates each class by day, and then, you know, if a student needs help in a particular class, they can go out to that one and get more help. It's kind of like a mandatory tutor system, you know, built into the schedule. But every Friday they have a fun tutor where you can either go to a club the school has hosted by a teacher in the room, or you can have a teacher can come up with their own of what they want to do in that 40-minute period of time. So some of the other teachers have done like a Dungeons and Dragons one. There's a college football talk. There's stand-up comedy. There are ones that you can just kind of read and relax type of deals. Well, I was trying to think of what I would want to do, and inevitably I think whatever I wanted to do, I would pretty much have no students interested in it, or maybe just a couple. But I decided to do, I was going to do like just a linguistics club, just looking at interesting languages, but I decided to make it a world music and languages. World music and languages, because I love folk music around the world, and then languages are just fascinating. So that's what I decided to do. So I'm excited for that. The first one will be tomorrow, so I'll see if anyone is interested at all. And if nobody is interested, I'm totally fine with that, because I'll just play some crazy music and maybe read one of these books or bring one of my bilingual editions of poetry or something. But anyway, I've just totally fallen down the rabbit hole with Indo-European language and poetics and myth. And it seems like it's a pretty small club. Not to say that I'm in it, but every one of these books I have, so like Calvert Watkins was one of the Indo-Europeanists of the mid-20th century in America, and Benjamin Fortson, I think, was one of his students. And then you also have M.L. West, who was like a Homer scholar, who also studied the Hittite influences of Greek poetics and myth. There's also another book that was done recently, only a few years ago, I believe, called From Hittite to Homer, that was inspired by M.L. West's work. And M.L. West has a book called Indo-European Poetry and Myth, and that's like an excellent, absolutely excellent, thorough work on Indo-European poetry and myth. And remember, Indo-European stretches from Sanskrit to Russian to Greek to Latin to German to English to, of course, all the Romance languages, all the languages that grew out of Sanskrit, and it's the most widely spoken language family on Earth, with I think 3 billion people that speak an Indo-European language. And of course, from colonization is a lot of that, but still, it's a lot of it was thousands and thousands of years old. As far as the growth from India all the way to Europe. And then, of course, along with that, and I've really been trying to develop the idea, and it's not original at all, but just this idea that the mythology has its foundation in the language. So as soon as you get rid of the language, especially fairly rapidly, like the loss of Latin as a meaningful language in Western culture, I think you start to lose the culture, you start to lose the mythology, you start to lose the poetics. And I wonder how much of our loss of religion in the West was tied to the loss of Latin. I don't know. I have no idea, actually. But I think it's worth looking into, maybe. Maybe someone has already done that. So anyway, yeah, I've just been, I don't really have much I can say about it now. I have been kind of kicking around the idea of writing an essay about Finnegan's Wake, since I've been reading it for a few years now, and kind of fell down the rabbit hole of these Indo-European books, but we'll see. And these are both absolutely amazing books if you're interested in this at all. Indo-European Language and Culture, How to Kill a Dragon, Aspects of Indo-European Poetics, and then Indo-European Poetry and Myth. And I found actually How to Kill a Dragon, somebody from the Discord was generous enough to recommend it. So it's fascinating stuff. And then another book I've been interested in lately, which I have not read, but I'm really interested in, is this book here, The Ritual Process, Structure and Anti-Structure by Victor Turner. So Victor Turner was a mid-20th century American anthropologist, married to Edith Turner. And he has a son, Frederick Turner, who's a literary critic. You might know him. But this book, what I'm interested in with it is he developed the idea of communitas, which is the I might as well not even mention it because I haven't read the book and I don't want to fuck it up. But anyway, yeah, look into this book if you're interested in this idea of restoration of the landscape. I actually found out about this guy from the book The Sunflower Forests, and I was also interested to find that this Victor Turner guy was mentioned by the people who do the Civium Project and this Game B world. And it just seems like a very valuable idea, and I think also within the mindset of being a teacher and this, maybe improvisation aspect of teaching and just communal aspect of teaching and kind of this communal flow state sort of idea, I think is a compelling idea to keep in mind. So anyway, yeah, interesting book, The Ritual Process. And I've also been looking into Balinese religion. The Religion of Java by Clifford Geertz is on the list, high on the list, along with Javanese epic poetry. Old Javanese. All right, and finally we make it to the Wasteland. Now I have a treat for you guys one of these days. I'm not sure when I'll get to it, but I have an interesting T.S. Eliot paraphernalia to talk about. But this here is a book that I had owned previously, but it got ruined in the fire. And I, for no reason in particular, just never replaced it, for a year and a half or so, 2 years, however long it's been. And I just kept thinking about it. I kept thinking about it, especially the original title for The Wasteland, which is He Do the Police in Different Voices. I just think that's an amazing title, Of course, The Wasteland is totally excellent too, from the idea of the wasteland in the Arthurian myths. which I have an idea of a video on coming up. But this book is just fascinating because I'm sure you guys know Ezra Pound did some heavy annotating and editing for the Wasteland for T.S. Eliot. And then this came out in the 70s, facsimile. But yeah, as you can see here, he do the police in different voices. And I'll just show you guys. Yeah, towards the end of his period at Merton College, he confided his dilemma to Conrad Aiken, Harvard. He did not think he would ever come to like England, but he dreaded returning to Cambridge. If you go to England, you'll regret it. If you come back to the US, you'll regret it. Whether you go to England or you come back to the US, you'll regret it either way. And this was in 1915 that this was going on. But we get to, and if you guys haven't seen that quote, this is a fascinating quote about the Wasteland. Various critics have done me the honor to interpret the poem in terms of criticism of the contemporary world, have considered it indeed as an important bit of social criticism. To me, it was only the relief of a personal and wholly insignificant grouse against life. It is just a piece of rhythmical grumbling. And he do the police in different voices, and I want to remind myself what he titled, oh yeah. So instead of A Game of Chess, which is of course an excellent title, it was In the Cage. The chair she sat in like a burnished throne glowed on the marble where the swinging glass, held up by standards wrought with golden vines, from which one tender Cupidon peeped out. Another hid his eyes behind his wing. The interesting thing about this is you can see the fully expanded version of the Wasteland with, I think, a significantly less a much less intense ambiguity to a lot of the ideas. Kind of like when you look at the early drafts of Finnegan's Wake, you really start to see the inner skeleton that allowed the whole work to flower and develop. So if you ever find yourself having a difficult time trying to figure out exactly what Eliot's trying to do with the Wasteland, I highly recommend getting a copy of this facsimile and transcript of the original drafts before Ezra Pound mucked with it. No, I'm just kidding. But see, he wrote this whole first part for the burial of the dead, but he took it all out. All of that whole page was originally the start of the Wasteland, but he took it all out. He wrote all of that. And then, of course, he starts with, April is the cruelest month, breeding lilacs out of the dead land, mixing memory and desire, stirring dull roots with spring rain. And remember when I mentioned that part about that Yvonn Blaney? This is what I was mentioning with, did I mention that it reminds me of T.S. Eliot? Summer surprised us, coming over the Koenig Sea, which he changed. With a shower of rain, we stopped in the colonnade and went on in sunlight into the Hofgarten and drank coffee, talking an hour. And we were children staying at the Archduke's. My cousins, he took me out on a sled. And I was frightened. He said, Marie, Marie, hold on tight. And down we went in the mountains. There you feel free. I read much of the night and go south in the winter. Or I read much of the night and go south in the winter. But yeah, I'm really stuck with the idea that we aren't past modernism yet. I think only now in our current time our current time has changed things enough that we can actually get past modernism to a meaningful degree. I don't think postmodernism was powerful enough to do anything to the questions that modernism was unable to solve. Not to solve, Might even say something like the questions modernism was unable to generate. But yeah, I think we're getting to the point where we might be able to do something different. We might be able to come up with some more interesting questions, or the problems that will arise in our lifetime are ones that are unaccounted for by previous thoughts. It's hard to say. It's hard to say, but I have, ever since I did really a deep dive into modernism, I was just totally convinced by the idea that postmodernism is completely insufficient to deal with modernism. And I've heard similar ideas with the idea that, you know, our contemporary thought has not dealt with Fernando Pessoa. And that just seems totally obvious to me. And also the fact that a significant majority of the thinking mass of Earth can't account for Finnegan's Wake, which is almost like the supreme modernist work of the world, and nobody gets it. Like, how is it that it's been 80 years, literally 80 years, 82, but 80 years, and still nobody understands Finnegan's Wake? It's crazy. So it just makes me think that, and this is kind of going into that idea, that essay I've been kicking around in my head, that really the thing with Finnegan's Wake that makes it difficult is not the language. People get thrown off by the language in a way that, you might get thrown off if you're only a native English speaker and you start to, look at Spanish. It might look like a completely crazy language, but in reality it's extremely similar. People get thrown off by it, but it's not different. It's really the puns and things like that in Finnegan's Wake are really somewhat trivial, I think. Not trivial in the way of unimportant, but trivial in the sense of difficulty. The real difficulty that comes is the conceptual difficulty that Finnegan's Wake requires people to account for when they're reading it. And I think even a lot of people, and I might include myself in this for now, but a lot of people who feel like they understand it absolutely don't. And I think a lot of people who get into Finnegan's Wake through like the drug route, through like, the LSD types or whatever, really start off on a unbalanced footing, and only after a lot of work can get back to the right path as far as understanding it, because long story short, Joyce didn't need drugs, and I think they might actually put you at a disadvantage for understanding the book. But that's a thought for another time, I think. Well, this video's gone on pretty long, but I think I kind of wanted to hit everything I wanted to hit. So anyway, let me know if any of these ideas, or you've thought about them or have anything to say about them. So yeah, so thanks for being patient for me not putting up any videos. I've been trying to hold myself to one a week, but these last couple weeks at the school have really taken a lot of my mental power, so mental space. So anyway, thanks guys. Death is a gang boss.